Welcome in, everybody. Today we're doing a deep dive into something called apophatic theology.
Yeah, it's a fascinating way to try to understand the divine, the really big questions.
By
But
focusing on what it's not.
yeah, exactly. So if
Uh-huh.
you're into like spirituality, philosophy, things like that,
Or if you just like thinking about the big questions, like what's
yeah.
it all about, right?
Yeah, this one's for you.
This one is for you. So we've got some really interesting sources for this deep dive. We've got some academic
Some more
definitions
scholarly stuff. Yeah.
to like ground us, what are we even talking about here?
Yeah.
We've got a personal essay from someone reflecting on their own experiences with apophatic theology.
Yeah, more of a personal take, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, and then to really spice things up, we're also going to be looking at some classic religious texts.
Oh yeah, always good to go back to the classics.
The Tao Te Ching, the Bible. We're going to see what they have to say about this whole way of negation thing.
Exactly. We've got a lot of different perspectives on this idea, all coming from different angles.
Okay, so let's just dive right in, shall we?
Yeah.
What is the core concept here? This way of negation, I gotta admit, it's a bit mind-bending at first.
It is, right? So imagine this. You're trying to understand the entire ocean, like the vastness of it. But all you've got is like a tiny keyhole to look through.
Okay, I can picture that. It's like you're getting a very limited view.
Right. And that's kind of what it's like when we try to define like God or the divine with just our human words. Our language is like that keyhole.
So apophatic theology is saying step back from the keyhole, look at the bigger picture.
Yeah, it's like saying, forget about trying to define it. Instead of saying God is this or God is that, we focus on what God isn't limited by.
So it's more about acknowledging the limitations of our own understanding than trying to put the divine into a neat little box, right?
Exactly. Is recognizing that the divine, that ultimate reality, whatever you want to call it, it just goes way beyond our ability to understand it fully.
I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling. It's like when you're experiencing something truly amazing, a stunning sunset or a deep connection with someone.
You get that feeling, like words can't quite capture it.
Right. Are you saying apophatic theology starts from that place, that recognition that words just aren't enough?
Totally. It embraces that mystery and says, okay, we can't fully grasp this with our minds, but we can still try to understand it. We can explore it by acknowledging what it's not.
Okay, I'm starting to get it, I think. But why negation? Why not use positive descriptions? Even if they're imperfect, couldn't they still help us connect with the divine, at least on an emotional level?
That's a good question, and I get why we'd want to use positive descriptions. But here's the thing. If we really believe the divine is unimaginable, as one of our sources puts it, which I kind of do, then any positive word we use just falls short.
I see what you mean. It's like we're trying to fit the ocean into a teacup.
Right. We end up limiting the divine to fit our human ideas, and that just doesn't work.
So we need to think bigger, use a different approach. Our essayist, the one who wrote about their personal experiences, they have a great example of how this apophatic theology works in practice. They quote this 5th century mystic, Pseudo-Dionysius. He was hugely influential in Christian thought, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Very important figure.
And he gives us this whole list of what God isn't T. It's like he's pushing back against our need to define and categorize.
Oh, yeah. Pseudo-Dionysius, he was a master of that. Like, he would say things like, God is not good.
Wait, God is not good. How does that work?
He means God is not good in the way we understand goodness. It's like our idea of good is just too small, too limited to apply to the divine.
I'm starting to see how radical this approach is. We're basically throwing out all our usual ways of thinking.
We kind of have to. We got to acknowledge that our language, our concepts, they just can't fully grasp the divine. And by doing that, by saying what God is not, we actually start to expand our understanding. We open ourselves up to this vastness that's beyond our grasp.
Okay, so this is not just some abstract philosophical game.
Yeah.
This apophatic theology has real implications for how we relate to the divine. It changes things.
Oh, totally. It's not just about playing with words. It's about shaping our whole approach to spirituality.
So how does it do that? What's the practical impact of thinking about the divine in this way?
Well, first off, it makes you humble. When you realize you can't fully grasp the divine, you approach it with a lot more awe and reverence. You let go of that arrogance of thinking you can control it.
That's a powerful point. It reminds me of how mysterious our own consciousness is, even to ourselves. We can study the brain all we want, but we still don't really understand how subjective experience happens. There's a kind of unknowability at the core of who we are.
Exactly. That sense of mystery is something apophatic theology encourages us to embrace, both in ourselves and in our understanding of the divine. It's about acknowledging the limits of our knowledge and being open to the vastness beyond that.
So this idea of embracing the mystery, that seems to be something that resonates across different spiritual traditions. It's not just a Western thing, right?
No, not at all. You find apophatic thinking in various forms across the world.
Let's look at some specific examples. Our sources mention Taoism, which seems like a natural fit for this way of thinking.
Yeah, definitely. The Tao Te Ching, the foundational text of Taoism, it's filled with apophatic language. It says, the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. So right from the start, it's saying that ultimate reality, the Tao, is just beyond words.
So Taoism encourages us to recognize that words and thoughts are limited,
Hmm.
especially when it comes to the big stuff.
Exactly. It's about letting go of our fixed ideas and being open to the mystery of existence.
And this connects with other Eastern traditions as well, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Think about the Buddhist concept of sunyata, which gets translated as emptiness, but it's much richer than that. It's about the impermanence of everything and how holding on to rigid definitions, clinging to fixed identities, that's what causes suffering. And when we let go of those rigid ideas, embrace the emptiness of inherent existence, that opens us up to experiencing a deeper reality.
So both Taoism and Buddhism, in their own ways, point to a reality beyond our normal ways of thinking and categorizing. But what about Western religions? Our essayist makes a pretty surprising argument about how apophatic theology can be seen in Christianity.
It's definitely an interesting interpretation, and one that might make some folks uncomfortable. They suggest looking at the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus through an apophatic lens.
Wait, how does that work? Help me understand this one.
Okay, so they're saying that death, in this context, we can see it as a return to the non-state of the divine, a state that goes beyond our usual categories of life and death, even beyond being and non-being. It's just beyond words.
So are they saying that through death, Jesus returns to a state of pure being that we just can't comprehend?
That's it. It's a radical way to look at those events. And as the author admits, it might challenge traditional Christian beliefs.
That's mind-blowing. I never thought about the crucifixion in those terms before. Isn't that a pretty unconventional take? How would a more traditional theologian respond to this idea?
It's definitely controversial. You'd probably get a lot of different responses from traditional theologians. Some might see it as going against the core beliefs, while others might be more open to exploring the apophatic aspects of Christian thought. This is a conversation that's been going on for centuries.
This is where things get really interesting. Even within a single tradition like Christianity, there are multiple ways to understand these central events.
And that's part of what makes apophatic theology so compelling. It pushes us to think beyond the literal meanings and really grapple with these deeper mysteries at play.
It's like we're allowed to admit we don't have all the answers. And that's okay. Actually, maybe that's where the real journey begins.
I think you're right. It's a shift from searching for certainty to being okay with not knowing. And embracing that not knowing can be incredibly powerful and inspiring.
This whole conversation is making me think about how much we rely on language. If words aren't enough to describe the divine, what other ways are there to connect with it, to experience it?
That is a huge question, and mystics and spiritual seekers have been exploring this for ages. Things like meditation, contemplation, just being out in nature. These practices can give you a feeling of awe and wonder that goes beyond words.
You're talking about a different way of knowing,
Yeah.
something beyond our rational minds.
Yeah, exactly. And those experiences, they can change you deeply, even if you can't fully explain them.
This whole idea of apophatic theology, it's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? We're
Yeah.
talking about something that's beyond language by using, well, language.
It's ironic, right? We're using words to talk about the limits of words, but that's kind of the beauty of it. We're using language to point towards something that's bigger than language itself.
It's like that quote we talked about from the Tao Te Ching. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. Like, words can only take us so far, and then we have to jump into the mystery.
Yeah, and that leap can be scary and exciting at the same time. It means letting go of our need to be certain, to control things, and embracing the unknown.
Okay, so we've been talking about these big, abstract ideas, but how does this all apply to us, to our everyday lives? How can we take these ideas about apophatic theology and use them in our own experiences?
That's a great question. I think one of the biggest takeaways is about being humble. When we realize that we don't know everything, that helps us be more open, more curious about the world. It helps us be more present, more open to new experiences, more compassionate toward ourselves and others.
It's like saying, it's okay not to have all the answers.
I think so. It allows us to
Yeah.
keep learning and growing. And this approach can help us through hard times too. When you're dealing with pain or loss, it can be comforting to remember that there's this vastness that we can't comprehend. There's a mystery holding us, even in the darkest moments.
Instead of trying to force things into categories or demanding easy answers, we can just sit with the mystery, trust that there's more happening than we can understand.
And that trust, that willingness to surrender to the unknown, that can bring you real peace and strength.
Our essayist makes this really interesting point. He says that recognizing the non-existence of God, meaning God's existence, is beyond our usual categories of being. It actually helps us appreciate our own existence even more, and the existence of the world around us.
That is deep. It's like by facing that ultimate mystery, the vastness of what we can't know, we gain a new perspective on the beauty and preciousness of the world we live in.
It brings us back to what's right here, what
Ye-
we can experience, what we can love.
Absolutely.
It reminds us that even though we might not have all the answers, we can still find meaning and purpose in our lives and our relationships, just in being alive.
It's about embracing that paradox, finding meaning in the meaningless, finding presence in the absence, light in the darkness.
This whole conversation makes me realize how much we value certainty and control in our culture. We want to define everything, categorize it, put it in neat little boxes.
It's a very human tendency.
But apophatic theology, it's like an invitation to step outside those boxes, embrace the mystery, and remember that there's always more to learn, always more to discover.
It's a call to be humble, to stay curious, to keep exploring, and sometimes that exploration takes us to surprising places.
Speaking of surprising places, earlier we talked about how this apophatic approach leads to some unconventional interpretations, like that view of the crucifixion we discussed. It makes me wonder, are there other examples of apophatic theology leading to these surprising or even controversial interpretations in other traditions, I mean?
Oh, yeah, tons. And what's cool is that this whole approach, this apophatic thing, it can actually be a bridge between like belief and skepticism.
So you're saying it gives people a way to engage with spirituality even if they struggle with traditional beliefs.
Exactly. It doesn't force you to accept certain ideas. It just opens up this space for mystery, for not knowing. And that's really relevant today in a world that's all about science and concrete answers.
Our essayist makes a strong argument for that apophatic theology is super relevant for how we think today.
Yeah, I agree. Think about it. We're always bombarded with information, always looking for the quick and easy answer. Apophatic theology says, whoa, hold on a sec. Let's pause. Let's just acknowledge what we don't know.
It's like giving ourselves permission to say, I don't know, and be okay with it, which is actually really freeing.
It is. And that, I don't know, it can be the start of something way more interesting than any simple answer could ever be.
This makes me think about how much emphasis we put on language. Like, if words are so limited when we're talking about the divine, how else can we connect with it, experience it?
Oh man, that's the big question, right? It's something that mystics and spiritual seekers have been exploring forever. Meditation, contemplation, spending time in nature. These practices can give you a sense of awe and wonder that you just can't put into words.
So it's a different way of knowing, something beyond just our rational thinking minds.
You got it. And these experiences, they can totally change you, even if you can't describe them.
It strikes me that this whole idea of apophatic theology is kind of, well, paradoxical. We're
Yeah.
talking about something beyond language by using dot language.
Yeah, it's funny, right? We're using words to point to the limits of words, but I think that's what makes it so cool. We're using language to try to point towards something that language itself can't fully contain.
It's like that line from the Tao Te Ching. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. So words can only take us so far, and then we got to take a leap of faith.
Exactly. And that leap, it can be scary, but it can also be amazing. It takes a willingness to let go of needing to know everything, to be in control, and just embrace the unknown.
Okay, so we've been in the clouds here with these big ideas, but let's bring it back down to earth for a minute. What does all this mean for us? How can we take these ideas about apophatic theology and actually use them in our lives?
Yeah, good question. I think the most important thing is being humble. Recognizing that we don't know everything, that makes us more open and curious about the world. It helps us be more present, more open to new things, more compassionate towards ourselves and others.
It's like admitting that it's okay not to have all the answers.
Exactly. It lets us keep learning and growing. And this approach, it can actually help us through tough times too. When you're going through something painful or you've lost someone, remembering that there's something bigger than us, something beyond our understanding, it can be a real comfort. There's a mystery holding us, even in the darkest times.
So instead of trying to force everything into a category, demanding an answer for everything, we can just be with the mystery, trusting that there's more happening than we can grasp right now.
And that trust, that willingness to just surrender to what we don't know, it can be so powerful. It can give you real strength.
Our essayist, he says something pretty profound about this. He says that by acknowledging the non-existence of God, meaning God's existence is beyond our usual ideas of being, it helps us appreciate our own existence even more and appreciate the world around us.
Whoa, yeah, that's powerful. It's like when you come face to face with that ultimate mystery, the vastness of what we just can't know, it gives you a whole new appreciation for the beauty of the world, the beauty of just being alive.
It brings us back to what's here, what we can experience and love right now.
Right here, right now.
And it reminds us that even if we don't have all the answers, our lives can still have meaning and purpose. It's in our relationships, in our experiences, just in being alive.
It's about holding on to that paradox, finding meaning where things seem meaningless, being present even when things feel absent, finding light in the darkness.
This whole conversation, it's making me realize how obsessed our culture is with certainty and control. We want to define everything, put it in a box, make it neat and tidy.
That's what we're used to.
But apophatic theology, it's like a challenge to break out of those boxes. Embrace the mystery. Remember that there's always more to learn, always more to explore.
It's about being humble, staying curious, being on a lifelong journey of discovery. And that journey can take us to some amazing places.
Speaking of amazing places, remember earlier when we were talking about how this apophatic approach can lead to some pretty unusual interpretations, like that view of the crucifixion? What makes me wonder, are there any other examples of apophatic theology leading to surprising or controversial interpretations? In other traditions, I mean.
Oh, absolutely. One that comes to mind is in Kabbalah, the Jewish mystical tradition. They have this concept of the Ein Sof, which means like without end.
Okay, I've heard of that, but I don't really know much about it.
So it refers to this unknowable, infinite God that exists beyond any names or descriptions we could come up with. Even those 10 Sephiros, which are often seen as like emanations or aspects of God, they're just glimpses into the vastness of the Ein Sof, not definitions.
So even in a system that uses all these symbols and metaphors to talk about the divine, they still recognize that ultimate reality is beyond our grasp.
Exactly. And this idea isn't just in mystical traditions either. Some scholars say you can even see traces of apophatic thinking in classical Islamic theology. They emphasize God's absolute oneness and transcendence, which kind of leads to recognizing that we can't really describe God with our words.
That's so interesting. It seems like this approach of using negation to understand the divine, it's more common than I thought, like a hidden thread connecting all these different spiritual paths.
I think so too. It makes you wonder if maybe this way of thinking isn't so unusual after all. Maybe it's just part of being human, you know?
Like we're wired to recognize that we don't know everything and to be okay with that mystery.
Yeah, I like that idea. Which brings us back to that question you asked earlier. Does this whole apophatic approach make the divine more relevant or less relevant in a world that's so focused on what we can see and measure?
It's a question that really makes you think, especially in a world that's all about data and facts and having the right answer.
Right. On the one hand, you could say apophatic theology makes the divine seem more distant, harder to grasp, but maybe it actually makes it more real, more present in our lives.
How so?
Because it's not about following dogma or believing certain things. It's about encountering the divine through experience, through the mystery and wonder that's all around us.
So instead of trying to define what the divine is, we're more focused on, like, feeling it, experiencing it directly.
Exactly. Finding the sacred in the ordinary, the infinite in the finite. Sensing that divine spark in the rustle of leaves, the vastness of the cosmos in a tiny drop of dew.
I love that imagery. It's like we're seeing the world with new eyes, recognizing the mystery that's always there, even in the most everyday moments.
And that shift in perspective, it can change everything. It can open us up to awe, gratitude, a feeling of connection with something much bigger than ourselves. And that can really enrich our lives.
So it sounds like apophatic theology isn't just a different way to think about the divine, it's a different way to live in the world. Being open to the unknown, finding the sacred in everyday life, and connecting with something larger than ourselves, even if we don't fully understand it.
Beautifully put. It's about letting go, embracing the mystery, and ultimately discovering more about who we really are.
This has been an incredible deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us as we explored apophatic theology. I hope it's given you some new ideas to think about, some questions to ponder, and maybe even a sense of wonder about all the mysteries that surround us.